Good evening and welcome to Live United. Live United is an opportunity to share resources, services, the great work that goes on in the Monadnock region that makes a difference in all of our citizens' lives. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Tony Ellsworth. Tony is the Executive Director of Rise for Baby and Family. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I really am pleased that you're here because Rise provides such a unique service to the Monadnock region. And so I'm really looking forward to you having an opportunity to share more about not only what you offer, but the difference that it's making in the lives of the families that you serve. So tell us a little bit about the history of Rise for Baby and Family.
Rise has been providing services to infants and toddlers since 1981. And we actually were part of an earlier agency called Monadnock Children's Services Center. And it was the center that actually helped start some of the local special ed programs. But in 1981, Rise came into being through a grant from the Developmental Service System. And at that time, there was the process of deinstitutionalizing people with disabilities from institutionalized settings. And so the state recognized that if we're no longer going to have institutions, we have to support families from the beginning. And so they created some seed money to start Rise.
So Rise for Baby and Family, and I love that baby and family is in there. What is the population that you're serving then?
So we serve infants and toddlers, birth to age 3. And the way I like to think about Rise is we have two programs, our early supports and services or early intervention program and our child care program. We're here today to mostly talk about our early intervention program because that's the program that's funded by United Way. But our two programs have a wonderful symbiotic relationship where each is improved by the presence of the other. So I like to talk about child care as well, and especially to talk about playgroup, because playgroup is unique to Rise, and it would not exist without the help of United Way.
So let's start with the first one, and I find it fascinating. You've got family in there too.
Yes,
so I'm guessing
absolutely.
It's not just about the child birth to 3, it's about the family.
It is all about families. So for a child to be eligible for services, they might have been born with some kind of developmental difference that's suggestive of long-term problems. Things like Down syndrome that people are very used to understanding about, or cerebral palsy, or a vision impairment, or a hearing impairment, or any of a great number, cardiac issues, any of a number of issues that we know from the beginning that that child's development will be affected and they could benefit from some help. But a large majority of our children are identified as delayed in their development. So what that means is families have a feeling, that there may be something, their parent who's had other children, and they recognize that this child's developmental milestones are not what they've been expecting, or they've been to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician does some developmental screening and identifies that a need is there, or the child may be developing atypically. So things that we're all used to seeing in our young children, things like feeding problems, or sleep problems, or behavior issues, or sensitivity to different things. We're all used to seeing those, but for some families, their child's issues are outside the norm, and that will make them eligible for services as well. And the fourth way that a child can be eligible is if they're at risk. So at risk means that a child either has a lot of health issues around the time of their birth that are suggestive of long-term problems, things like an intracranial bleed, lots of different medical problems, or there are family factors that make them eligible. Very young parents, parents who have a disability themselves, or a mental health issue, or substance abuse, or a whole constellation of those issues that can make a child eligible. So we serve lots of different types of children with different types of needs, and our families are equally as diverse. We have families that come to us that have great parenting skills, that have their own resources in terms of home, insurance, transportation, and we have families that don't have those resources available to them. So our job is to meet each child and family at that unique place where we can begin together. And so no two children and no two families are the same. Our job is to form a partnership with them.
I like hearing that, because you're really filling a gap that can exist for a family, for a child. When you think about that they may be identified by a doctor or someone from outside the family structure, but there is times where within the family structure people can see things going on.
Absolutely.
And they may feel like they may have the financial means or the resources, or they may not. So that gap's being filled. But you're also filling that gap for any family that's out there that's experiencing these kinds of issues.
That's right. That's right. And I think parents are generally the first ones to recognize that there's something different going on. And so often in the past, the advice that they got was, don't worry. You know, Einstein didn't talk till he was 5, or Uncle so-and-so didn't talk until later. And so people were sort of placated, and the worry never went away. And the issue didn't go away. And now I think both parents and physicians and the public understand that the earlier the better. And if parents have concerns, there's no harm in going and having an evaluation and getting some expert advice on whether this is typical or whether there are things that they could be doing that would help that child.
And you mentioned how critical that is to foundational success and long-term success for an individual. When we think about our children then going on to an educational setting, that foundational work, that preliminary work with them can make such a difference in their readiness to be in maybe a more an environment that may not meet some of those needs initially, and to have that identification occur early on and be able to provide those supports is just so critical. Now, you mentioned that you're providing these services. Do you provide them just in Keene because you're based in Keene, or do you meet the needs of families from across the Monadnock region?
We serve the 34-town region, and our services happen in families' homes. That's really the primary place where it's happening. So babies and toddlers are part of families, and if we went in there 1 hour or 3 hours a week, it wouldn't make a hill of beans difference. What really makes a difference is if we share our skills with families. So our visitors are going out to families' homes, and they're working together with parents. Often it's the mom. They go when dads are there as well. There are often siblings there that they include in visit. Grandmas often want to be part of that, aunts. So our home visitor will go out, work with the family in their home where they're most comfortable, where children are most comfortable, and they share their skills on the kinds of things that would help solve whatever issues are going on with them. I wanted to go back as well and talk a little bit about how important the early years are. You know, I think all of us as parents or community members, you know, we have a sense that the early years are really important, but we have really empirical scientific information now that helps us to know that the first 3 years of life are critical in a child's development. So unlike the lungs and the liver and the kidneys, the brain is not fully formed when a child is born. And so it's continuing to grow, to develop neurons and synapses. And so what happens in that first 3 years of life makes a huge difference. We know that from the research that children who don't get what they need in the early years, their brains don't develop in the best pathways. Children who are neglected, children who are malnourished, children who are mistreated, that their brains don't grow in the ways that they should. Similarly, if a child is born who has some brain differences and we begin to provide early intervention in those years, then the brain forms new synapses and new pathways. And so there's actually a restorative effect on the child's brain as a result of early intervention. And that brain growth continues throughout the early years, but the first 3 years are the critical first 3 years.
And there's actually periods in a person's life, the first 3 years being the most critical. I think studies have shown that the development that occurs during that time frame is about 10 times the development period of any other point in their lives. And then the other big development period, believe it or not, is when they're between 12 and 15.
Right. Yeah.
Then, of course, before they hit 25, there's another growth spurt in the pathways of the brain, and so that developmental piece is just so critical that you're mentioning. And when you add into that that somebody may have challenges because of either their social environment or some physical issues, it's so important to reach them early on. How many families do you typically serve during the course of a year?
We serve about 225 families in an average year. And it's kind of a revolving door because unlike the public school system, everybody starts at 5 and goes through June. With us, children are identified at any given time. So it might be October when a family makes the call and we begin our process with the family. And then as children turn 3, they might turn 3 in February or May or whenever, so it is a changing population. So we serve about 120 children at any given time and about 225 children over the course of the year.
I think our audience might be surprised to hear those kinds of numbers because I think oftentimes we don't think there's that many families out there that may be in need of this service. And my guess is there's families out there who don't even know that the service is available to them. So there's probably a much bigger unmet need out there. Now, do you do anything prenatal at all with families?
We don't. Sometimes we get families who call who know that they're going to have a child who needs us. And I think it's very reassuring for parents who are in that position to know that they will be delivering a child who has special needs, that we're out there for them. So we can begin to talk with them about services, and I think that's very reassuring to families, and we're happy to talk with families who are in that position.
So if a family wanted to reach you, and I'll ask you this a few times during the show, how would they best reach Rise for Baby and
They're
Family?
welcome to call Rise for Baby and Family 357-1395. Our referrals actually go through the area agency, Monadnock Developmental Services. So once that family is ready to refer, they call 352-1304, which is Monadnock Developmental Services. And they are a primary funding source for Rise, and they meet with families and fill out the application and ask them whether they want to come to Rise. And then they send on the referral to Rise, and we meet with families.
So it sounds like one of your collaborating partners is Monadnock Developmental Services.
Absolutely.
Who else do you work with out in the community?
Pediatricians are really important to us. That's a direct line of referrals. Pediatricians are required to do some developmental screening as well as all of the other things that they do. And they're really good at helping families to identify something that might be going on and knowing where to go with that. As I said before, pediatricians are, really understand that if parents have those concerns, that it's good to call and have it checked out as opposed to waiting. The earlier the better. We also work with DCYF, Division for Children, Youth and Families. They actually have a requirement for any founded case of abuse or neglect for children under 3 to be referred to Rise, and that's a real important partnership. Those are families who are really in crisis and need the support and help on many different levels to get their children on the right track and to be able to parent them well. We also work very closely with childcare programs in the region, and the reason that we work with so many childcare programs is because a lot of our children are in childcare, just like all families. And so if we're working with an individual child and we're seeing a family at home and they're spending 40 or 50 hours a week in childcare, then we want to also go in the childcare program and make sure the teachers and the staff in that center feel comfortable meeting that child's special needs and have the support and the strategies of people who can help them meet that child's needs. I think one of the issues that has been a struggle, and that we as a early childhood community have worked a lot with over the last 15 years, is the problem of child care expulsion. That there are some children that are very difficult to manage in child care, and it is because of their developmental differences. And no child care provider wishes to ask a child and family to leave, but sometimes they simply can't accommodate that child for whatever reason. So having our staff be in there and provide support and the special management that that child needs has really helped, so that child care providers feel more prepared and skilled at keeping the child who has some challenging differences that create some problem for them.
So it sounds like you provide almost some one-to-one case management in a situation like that, but also maybe some training. Do you provide training services to the other agencies?
Yes, I think that a lot of our training is done on a one-to-one basis. I meet with agency people on a regular basis to sort of keep the dialogue going, but the work around individual children really happens on a one-to-one basis.
Now, you mentioned that you're working with families birth to 3. And we know that there's been a lot of changes in state policy around funding and lots of different things that have impacted. And I'm curious whether the population you serve has been impacted at all by some of the laws that have been passed, the budget cuts that have existed in the state of New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the areas that has been affected a lot is the child care subsidy. The rules around the child care subsidy are pretty restrictive in terms of how long they will support someone in child care and the steps to get there. I think that's an area that I would really like to see the state do more of. The cost of child care for families is just a huge part of people's income. And it is really unaffordable, and it is really important that children be in quality child care and not in child care that's unlicensed or substandard. So that really is an area. We also work with a number of families who are homeless or living in transitional shelter or substandard shelter, and that's a huge area of need as well.
And it's such an important thing to talk about because I know I've been up at the State House a few times when people are advocating and really trying to affect policy here in the state of New Hampshire, and that child care issues always come up at a state level. Mm-hmm. I think there certainly have been brought to people's attention at a local level. When we think about these early foundational programs and supporting them and the difference it can make in the long term for people. And when we really look at what's even happening here in our region, where we have, the recent studies have just shown we have about 248 homeless youth here in the Monadnock region. Those are kids under 18. Mm-hmm. The last thing we want to see is people ending up in that position. But for a lot of those kids, they can't perform in school. They can't, they struggle at home and may not have the supports there. So programs like yours that build that support and that family support, most importantly, because it's not just the individual, it's really what's around them and is going to help them long term. So I think it's just a critical piece. I know you have some quotes from some of the folks that you've served, and so talk to us a little bit about the impact and share a story with us, about how it's making a difference out there.
Okay. So I think one of the ways that is fairly fairly obvious to people is we work with children until they're age 3. And there's an important reason why we stop at age 3, and that is that the school system is required to provide special ed services to children 3 to 21. So one of the ways that Rise is really successful at helping children and families is helping with that transition at age 3. So we know that a child who has special needs is not going to be cured by the time they turn 3, that they will have ongoing needs, even though they've benefited tremendously from the first 3 years. So we want to make sure that there's a smooth transition at age 3, and that they're not floundering, they're not left without services. So we work very closely with the school systems, and we introduce families to the school system. We go with them through that process, do little hand-holding. We help families understand what their rights are so they can advocate for themselves. And advocating doesn't mean adversaries. Advocating really means entering into a cooperative relationship that's in the best interest of everyone. So we work really closely with the school system, and I think that is a huge benefit to children and families. And our preschool partners tell us that there's a huge difference between a child who's come through Rise, a child and family who's come through Rise, than one that moves to the area and hasn't received early intervention services, that they are prepared for that relationship, that the child has had some group experience, that parents are ready, some of their early fears have been addressed, they have a better understanding of what their child's issues are, they've dealt with the grief of identifying their child as a child with special needs, so they're ready. They're ready for the formal educational system, and they're ready to be a partner, and children are ready to learn at that school age. So I think that's one of the greatest places. Another place is not all children go on to need special ed services. There are lots of children that come through Rise that are identified early, maybe with a motor delay or a speech delay, and or maybe some atypical behavior, and we've worked together with the family. We've gotten that child up to where they need to be, and they might graduate Rise at 11 months, they might graduate at 2 years. They're ready to go. And parents are armed with early information, and they also leave knowing that if something comes up again, they know what resources are out there, even after Rise, so that they know how to access services for their child. And so I think those are some real important ways that Rise helps. And parents are really helped by that early partnership. And I think that's another of the benefits. The other thing is that, as I said before, there are things we can't cure, but there are enormous things that we can change. And so issues that were long-term issues for families in the past, issues around feeding, issues around safety, because children didn't understand boundaries, issues around behavioral issues that make a child need more intensive services. Those are all things that can be made so much better by early intervention. Another example is a child with Down syndrome. You know, years ago, children with Down syndrome ended up in state institutions, and they led lives that weren't very satisfying, and they didn't have much independence. Our babies are doing fabulous now. You know, they're walking, talking children by the time they leave at 3. They're part of a group of children, and not only are they succeeding in that group, but our typical children are learning what wonderful friends and neighbors they are, and it's the beginning of a healthy relationship that should sustain everybody throughout their life.
It's a great thing to share, because I think that's probably something that people are most familiar with when they think about a child who may be in need. But also really highlighting what you talked about, that it may be a child that's experiencing neglect or abuse, and sometimes that just affects their development at this age. what are some of the needs that you have as a program? How could the community really serve you? And you're serving the community, but what are some of the things that you need from the community?
Well, I have to say that United Way is really a huge help in terms of help from the community. Not only are we well funded by United Way, it's about 7.5% of our funding comes from United Way, which might not sound like much, but it's a lot to us. But United Way provides funding, but it also provides an awareness. That network that United Way has really helps get out the word. So number one, we want families to be able to find us when they need us. That's sort of a number one way that the community can help us to help others. You asked about resources at the state level and funding cuts. Early supports and services are part of the developmental service system, and the developmental service system has had modest to no increases over the course of the time in general. And we do worry about that. We especially worry about that because of the changes at the state level to managed Medicaid. And Medicaid is a big part of our funding from the state. So voting for resources that help support the developmental service system is something we need people to understand. We need people to understand that it's really important that we continue to be here for families. Rise uses a lot of volunteers. We're really blessed by volunteers that bring us knitted items to pass out to our families, that help us provide celebration events, that come and do work days for us, and some of that is through United Way. Come and do a spruce up in our garden or in our building, or cleaning, going through sorting toys and all kinds of things that take the stress off of our staff. So all of those things are really important.
You mentioned volunteering, and I'll put a little plug in here because Thursday is Day of Caring here in the Monadnock region, and it's also National Day of Service. And RSVP and the United Way have teamed up, and we have teams of volunteers going out across the Monadnock region. So if you're interested in being a volunteer in that kind of effort, please contact the United Way. And you can hear Tony talking about how critical that is. Those are the kinds of things that if you can't afford to donate, giving your time is of great value to these organizations. I also know that people sometimes donate goods to you. Or do you have any needs for anything right now? Jackets for the winter season for families, that kind of thing.
We do. We are happy to take infant and toddler clothing, and especially warm jackets and boots and stuff. Our home visitors are really close with families, and so they're there and they can recognize needs and help get those things to individual children. We also do take toys, and some of the toys are appropriate for our use in our work, and others just go to families who don't have enough toys in their homes. Toys or books, anything birth to 3 really is we can find a home for.
So, you know, goods, volunteering, advocacy, getting out there and voting, those are all really important things for programs like Rise for Baby and Families. I know you had a couple of quotes from parents, and I would love you to be able to share those.
Every year, the state does a survey to families to find out how well we're doing, how well we're implementing the rules that we want to follow. And I'm happy to say that we follow the rules at 100%. Nothing else would be acceptable, but we do that well. But perhaps the richest part of the survey is when parents are asked to make a comment. And so I'd like to read a couple of these, if I may. My home visitor has been a great help to me in the aspect of teaching me new skills that I could try with my daughter in order to discipline her, praise her, brush her teeth, calm her down, and try to get her to sleep in her own bed. There's been much more she has suggested, and always in a calm, relaxing manner. I appreciate her coming over every week. I'm just sad this has to end when she's 3. It has been a great help to both my daughter and me. Here's another one. I was beyond pleased with Rise for Baby and Family. Our home visitors are exceptional in regards to teaching my son, connecting with him, explaining everything to me, and recommending family interactions to help my child. I wish we could continue to receive services after age 3 because I have a total trust in their techniques and judgments. The therapeutic play group was also phenomenal. The staff was great, as well as the activities. I could not have asked for a better group of people to help my child through play. So I hope you hear through these that this is not about going in and working with the child one-on-one. It's about imparting our skills and our strategies to parents and help them feel comfortable in doing those activities. My daughter started working with Rise when she was about 8 months old for learning to crawl. It was a big help. I was worried because she was behind in learning to crawl. Before we knew it, with our home visitor's help, she was walking. Now we're working with another home visitor for her speech, and my daughter has improved greatly. My home visitor has been wonderful. This child is not an easy 2-year-old to tolerate, but my home visitor lets her be her and do things at her pace. She's great at informing others that work with or see my daughter about how her comfort zone works. It's wonderful to have someone understand a child's special needs. As a first-time parent, I've learned a great deal from the wonderful people at Rise. Thanks very much.
Those are great quotes from people that you're serving. I am curious whether it's unique to the Monadnock region or whether services like Rise for Baby and Family are across New Hampshire, across the country.
Yes, yes. Rise is unique in the sense that it's a freestanding nonprofit agency, and we have some things that we do uniquely, but we are part of a developmental service system. So actually in any community in New Hampshire and in any community in the country, there's access to services for birth to 3, and those services originate with Part C. So Part C of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So there's a federal mandate around early intervention services. There's a state mandate in every state, and those line up, those two line up, but each state does it just a little bit differently. And in New Hampshire, we have about 15 early intervention programs. Rise is actually not the only early intervention program in the Monadnock region. Monadnock Developmental Services also operates a birth to 3 program. The things that are unique about Rise are that we have playgroup, we have a child care program related as well, and we have 33 years of experience at delivering services in this region.
So let's talk a little bit about the play group and the child care
Yes,
piece,
yeah.
because those are unique pieces
Yes.
that we have here.
Yeah. So we started out in 1981 providing services, early intervention services to children birth to 3. And we often brought children together because they learned so much from one another. I mean, you think about, and we all know this as parents and community members, you know, when you bring kids together and one's talking and, you know, the other one wants to keep up with them, and one's walking and the other one wants to toddle after them. So there's just so much that happens when children are brought together. So we started doing groups early on, and we would have about 6 children in the group, and we'd have a little circle time, and the only ones talking were the adults. Well, what's wrong with this picture? And we also had a deeply held commitment to including children with special needs with their typically developing peers. Along with that, we recognized that there was a great lack of quality infant toddler care in this region. And this goes back to the mid-'80s, and certainly it's gotten a lot better. We still don't have enough. But we got started to operate a small child care program. And it's really been a great learning experience and a great success. So our child care program is open to the public. It's for children 4 months to 3.5 years. It doesn't have a sliding scale fee. We do accept the child care subsidy. Families from all over come to us looking for child care. And many of us seek out that service because of this developmental piece that we have within the agency, and because they want their children to be exposed to children with individual differences as well. So by having the child care program, we had a unique opportunity to include our children with special needs. So we use our United Way money to fund what we call playgroup. And that makes it possible for a child who's identified as a child with special needs to come in 1 or 2 mornings a week, join in with the group of child care children, and have their opportunity to be there with other children, their first opportunity to be away from a parent. It's usually the first time they've been dropped off someplace to be with someone else and with a group of children, and have their needs met within that group. And that's also a great place to prepare children for that next step as they turn 3 and enter into the public school system.
I really want to advocate for that. I'm a parent of a child who went through Winston Prouty Center over in Brattleboro, and my child wasn't a child in need. She didn't have any developmental issues, but I, like many parents, wanted her to be inclusive and feel not just empathy, but I think what it really did for her, when I think back on it, and she's going to be 19 in this fall. You know, it made a difference in how she does include people, her own leadership skills and style, and how she not just includes people and her empathy for people, but really how she leads. And she learned so much, and it's interesting to me because many of those kids that she was with are still her friends to this day. And you think about that because they were all separated out when they were 4 or 5 years old. But they've maintained those relationships over a 15-year period. And I think that speaks a lot to that whole integrated piece and how people feel compassion for one another and the friendships that develop there. I really advocate for parents to have their children be in an environment like that at a very young age.
I had a similar experience with my boys that, you know, they left Rise at 3, and then when they went to kindergarten, they met up with some of those kids that they'd met at Rise, and they were attracted to them. They didn't really remember even some of the kids that they didn't have a long experience with, but they were attracted to them and continued their friendships with them, which is really nice.
And I actually think it impacts career choices and everything else for young people, and how they interact with folks all through their educational careers and within families and within community. So I really, really encourage people to, at least for a year, if not longer, have their children involved with especially if you've got a play group here available in the region that can be that kind of interaction. So I do, and I encourage you, audience, and I want to have Tony again share how you can reach out and be involved in these kinds of things, whether it's having your children involved in a play group, child care setting, whether you're in need of service, or whether you have something you'd like to give or you'd like to advocate for. You know, reach out to Tony, contact her. She's a great spokesperson, as you can see, for these kinds of efforts and for Rise for Baby and Family. So, Tony, how will they reach you again?
Well, we're located on 147 Washington Street in the big yellow building with a play yard out front. It's kind of a dead giveaway. Or you can reach us by calling 357-1395, or you can go on our website. We'd love to have you visit our website, riseforbabyandfamily.org. Or my email address is really long, but I think they'll put it on the screen. TElsworth@riseforbabyandfamily.org. And I'd like to go back and talk a little bit about what Playgroup does for children and families. There have been a lot of things over the course of time that have made me really proud of what we do and happy for what we're able to do for families, but there's some that really stand out for me. We had a little girl at one point who was born prematurely, and so her lungs were underdeveloped, and she was very vulnerable. And her parents both worked, and she had her grandma took care of her during the day, and she was actually not allowed to be in a group for many months because she was so vulnerable to respiratory infection. And once the doctor gave the clear, her parents were understandably concerned and worried about that access to other children. She was on oxygen, and she had a little portable oxygen unit that we're used to seeing on older people and not so much on young people. So she had a little portable oxygen tank, and her grandmother brought her in because parents were both working, and she stayed with her, to make sure she was protected. And so she had a little 30-foot tube, and, went up to her nose, and the children said, "What's that?" And the teacher said, "That's her oxygen tube. She needs that." "Oh, okay." And that's sort of the end of it, because, if it's something different and your questions are answered, it's okay, especially if you're two. And one day I was out in the play yard, and I was just tickled to death to see this little girl playing out there, and some of the other toddlers were riding their tricycles. And so there were kids that were going down the pathway, and the cord got across it, and so we had another toddler who was lifting up the cord while the children ran their bikes under it. So, it just shows you how open children are to differences, and how important it is that we give children that experience early on, both for the child who has the need and for all of our children that we want to develop empathy and understanding.
And what I wanted to highlight when I was sharing about my daughter is that openness has remained all of her life, regardless of what the issue is, whether it's about a physical, an emotional, or an orientation choice, whatever it may be. My daughter's openness to that has just been amazing, and I attribute that to her experience early on in her childcare environment. So appreciate that. We're coming towards the end of the show. Is there anything that you really want the public to be aware of that you want to highlight?
You told me this would go fast, and I didn't believe you, but one of the things that we haven't talked about is autism. And I think that's something that Rise does really well. We're really good at recognizing the red flags, and we're really good at helping to support families through that process, through helping to identify what the need is and providing really good intervention for those young children who are experiencing autism or on the autism spectrum. So that's, I
think that may be worth a show in and of itself, because Gary Barnes from MAPS was in as well and was also talking about that issue. So I invite you to come back, and perhaps we can have you on and then have Gary talking about the longer term impact of that. But you could talk about some of those early signals, things people may be wanting to look for.
The red flags.
Yes.
Yes.
So I want to thank you, Tony, for joining me. And you're right, it went very fast. And we so appreciate the work that Rise does out there. And I want to remind you, audience, that if you're in need of Rise services, or you'd like to give, volunteer, advocate, you can do that. If you can't remember how to reach out to Tony, please contact Monadnock United Way or dial 211. 211 will get you a referral to those services here in the Monadnock region. I want to thank you for joining us, and also to remember to give, volunteer, and advocate. Thanks and good night.